Welcome to Side Gallery. We have an audience online and an audience from the University of Sunderland here today. My name is Dean Chapman and I'm the curator of this exhibition, and I've been working here for over 20 years producing exhibitions for Side Gallery. With me today is Tessa Bunney, who is a practicing photographer, has been for 25 years, and this is her wonderful exhibition, Otherwise Unseen. I'd like to ask Tessa to start to talk about this exhibition and how she's found my approach to showing it.
Thanks, Dean. This exhibition, Otherwise Unseen, it brings together 4 pieces of work that I've done over the last 20 years in Europe and Asia. The 4 pieces are in Romania, which is hand to mouth, which is behind me, the Namu, which is based in Laos, and Homework, which is at the back, and Farmer Florist. I'm interested, Dean, why you decided to show lots of bodies of work rather than one piece.
Usually the work or the exhibitions that get shown inside gallery are complete exhibitions by a specific photographer or a group of photographers, more often than not around one theme. But the thinking behind this exhibition and Rena Effendi's exhibition downstairs was to show how photographers approach a subject such as yourself and the way people form the landscape, and Ren is also in that kind of mold, and how that approach to documentary photography develops over time from early work, which is 20 years ago, to more recent work, this year, last year, and how you develop as a photographer, but how you approach subjects that are similar but in completely different scenarios. So you have work that's taken in the UK and then work that's in a very remote area of Laos, and so that was the thinking behind the exhibition. So it'd be great if you could kind of tell us how you came about making this body of work in particular.
Yeah, the title Otherwise Unseen, which I meant to say before, was it came about because the work that I do is about some of the places are geographically isolated. People might not know about them. Some of them are showing work behind the scenes of an industry or work, and then some of them are, behind the scenes, like as in women's work, unseen work that women do. And this particular piece of work was taken in Laos, where I was based for 4 years, and it's part of a much larger project about landscape in Laos called the Corridor of Opportunity, which refers to the area on the border with China, where there's a lot of comings and goings of trading and wildlife trading and things like that. So the Namu's in the very remote part of Laos, Pong Sali, and it's a tributary of the Mekong. And when I first went there, I was working in Pong Sali for a number of years, travelling around the mountains, and then I had to cross the river eventually, and then I hit this scene which was the very, very first start of a hydropower project, 7 dams under construction. And I suppose it was like one of the moments in Laos. It was kind of what I call my stand and stare moments, when I went, oh crikey, this place is going to change forever. And so then I changed what I was working on. I decided to spend the rest of the 3 years backwards and forwards photographing the river and the development of the dam construction. So when I first went there, you could travel up and down the river freely by boat, and a lot of these pictures were taken. Some of these pictures here were in the dry season, when you had to use a very small boat. In the rainy season, it was a very dangerous river. The boatmen know every rock and every rapid like the back of their hands. So, there's quite a few dangerous moments, I have to say, where water was all coming in the boat and everything. And then I followed different villages along the river, as they, their livelihood. So they were mostly slash and burn farmers, different ethnic groups, different housing, all the different ethnic minorities. They had different religions. Some were Buddhist, some were more animist. So all those different things I was able to follow over the 3 years. And then as the time went on, they moved. So they first moved temporarily. So some of the images of temporary villages, and then they all got them like new villages built. So I was really, I mean, you couldn't organise it in advance. So I was really lucky that I turned up one day and they were actually moving their village on their backs up the hill. But it's just by being able to go there regularly that I was able to capture that. And some of the pictures, nearly all the pictures in the villages are villages that don't exist anymore. They're all under the water. And there's the final trip that I went, I started using a drone, so I was able to fly up above the river and really capture the kind of difference in the landscape. I could show the village in relation to the river and in relation to the flooding, the back flooding, which was something I hadn't been able to do, because obviously if you're taking pictures from river level, you get a completely different perspective. So that was a really great addition to the project, although the picture that's in the exhibition, I did lose the drone temporarily. It kind of disappeared. So that was a bit of a scary moment. And then I had 100 school children watching me, and I didn't know where it had gone. It just disappeared. And then when I went up the village on a motorbike, I came back and it was there, and the teacher said, oh yes, it came back by itself several minutes ago. So drones, very stressful. But I like the results, so I've persisted with it.
Well, once you had formed the idea of what the body of work was going to be about, how did you set about getting support to actually execute the work?
Financial support?
Yes. Yeah.
So I went over, originally I went with my family. We were going for 6 months, and originally I had a residency in Luang Prabang, which is a small town in northern Laos, and a commission it was part commission and part personal project to photograph a women's bomb disposal team from the Arts Council. But this actual piece itself was self-funded. So while I was there, I kind of developed this new strand of freelance work, which was working with NGOs, Oxfam, Save the Children and UN agencies. So, for example, they would ring me and say, do you want to go to the Philippines for 2 weeks and photograph the aftermath of the typhoon Haiyan? And so I did that, and then of course I got paid for that, and then it's cheap to live in Laos, so I was able to use that money then to go back to the river. So depending on how much money I had from freelance work was depending how much time I could spend in the river, because I had to pay for transportation, I had to pay for a translator, food and everything like that, hotel or guest house, or we stayed with villagers mostly up the river. It was cheap, but the actual logistics of getting there, which is the main thing about working overseas versus working in the UK, is, obviously when I'm working in the UK, I drive myself and I talk myself, but that's a big expense. So some months I could go for a week, some just a couple of days, so it all depended on that scenario, really.
As you were making the work, were you actually publishing it at the same time?
No, I've actually had no interest in anyone publishing it at all. This is the first time it's been exhibited, and I feel like I've captured something that's no longer there. It's a really important issue, hydropower. Does a small country like Laos really need all the hydropower projects that it's gone? So this actually hasn't been published in a magazine or anything like that. So I'm just hoping that one day people will think that this is a kind of historical event. I mean, this doesn't exist anymore already, so I think there's a couple of dams that still got a bit of work before they're actually operational, but basically it's all finished and you can no longer go up and down the river by boat. It's all a little bit of boat, then a bus, a little bit of boat, and all the boatmen who there were long-distance boatmen and short-distance boatmen. So the long-distance boatmen bought buses. If they were clever with their compensation money, they bought a bus and make their living like that now. So all that has kind of changed. So, yeah.
Do you have a plan to return there and document what's there now?
Yeah,
where the people
I would
ended up?
really, really like to go back to the villages. I mean, of some of the villages I've seen from their original place to their temporary place to their final place, some of them I haven't followed that through, and I would like to see the change in the landscape and they were all given 3 years of food by the government, but no way to make a living. So, they were talking about whether they would have coffee projects or, because basically their land went underwater, or it's too far away for them to go to. So I'd really like to go back and see how it's worked out for them. Have they managed to have an income, or how do they do it? Most of these people were travelling several kilometres back to their old fields because that was the only land they had, and of course they don't have vehicles, so they were having to live in the fields while they were working them instead of going backwards and forwards to their homes at night, which of course if you've got children and things, it's not the most ideal scenario. So I would I would like to go back and see how it's all mapped out for them, really.
Well, when you were there, were there any times when you were in danger or felt threatened?
I think the big thing about working in Laos was obviously to work as a journalist isn't really an option. Certain projects I had a press pass, but to work as a freelance and just roam around, I was basically working illegally. And so I knew that they knew where I was, because when I took the plane, I had to sign in and out, and I knew that my guide had to tell them where we were going on an official kind of documentation, but we didn't always stick to it. But it was quite surprising that nobody really challenged us. I was standing and taking pictures of dam projects, flying drones over things, and the guys would just come and chat to you and offer you a cigarette and things like that. There was no like, what you're doing or why you're doing it. And I don't know whether it's just like this thing I call my middle-aged mother disguise, where I just don't look like I'm the real thing. And even though I've got big camera and tripod, I kind of just carry on as normal, and no one. I mean, I definitely think, I was very, I suppose, wary of people don't really want to talk to you that much, because they don't want to. The Lao people don't demonstrate about dam constructions like the Thai and the Burmese people would, because it's a communist country, and so I wouldn't put names to things or kind of ask too many questions, really. So yeah.
And how did you find it taking your family with you to live there while you were freelancing as a photographer and pursuing this project?
Well, we decided that we were going to have this family adventure. Our son was 7 when we went, and we decided, rather than everyone said, why don't you just roam around the world, why don't you homeschool, why don't you do this, that, the other, and we decided that because we're the way we are, that we would send him off to international school. So he was based in, he was in the capital city with my husband. Well, we were all there. And in the end, we stayed longer because my husband managed to find a job. And the reason why we'd gone was because he got made redundant. So we had this kind of opportunity, which we took. We just, did the school thing and then travelled around the whole of Asia in the holidays. So he had a really great experience. We went to 10 different countries all over Asia in the holidays, and just made it an experience like that. And then he got to know children from all over the world. We come from a very small village in North Yorkshire. There's a very certain demographic of people that live there. So he had this opportunity as well. And, he still keeps in touch with them on Instagram. And, they could be from anywhere in Asia or Europe mainly, or Australia. Not so many African countries were working in Laos. But that kind of opportunity for him, really.
We have questions from the audience here in the room, and I think Lorraine has one that relates to your work there.
Hi.
Can we take the mic first, please?
On your online video, you mentioned that you were using translators, and I just wondered how you felt that affected the way you took images, or how you were able to capture what you wanted to capture.
I started using a translator first when I was working in Romania, and I started because 2 reasons really. One was safety, because I realised that I was traipsing around the countryside. I didn't really know where I was going. I was just wandering, and sometimes the people I met were like a bit kind of they kind of didn't really understand why I would be wandering around on my own as a Western woman in a kind of post-communist country, because women didn't do that there. And then the other reason was for communication. So when I was working in Romania, it was like women would invite me into their houses, and we'd try to communicate as best we could, a bit of French, a bit of sign language and stuff, but it just wasn't the same. And I think after some kind of experiences I had, I decided that it was better to use a translator for those reasons. And then when I then went to work in other countries, like Vietnam particularly was the second country I worked in, then followed by Laos, I always used a translator. And we had, because we had the transportation problem. So in Laos, for example, the guy that I worked in Pongsaly, he was the most fantastic person. He drove and he translated, and he was just the brilliant companion. We had the same kind of philosophy on travelling, like, oh look, there's a road we've not been down, or oh look, there's a footpath we've not been down, let's go. So he was as inquisitive about learning about the ethnic minorities in the area and the issues, and learning about what was happening with the dam, and he was getting paid, so he was happy. So that was really good. And then in different places, like in Vietnam, for example, the translators very much occupied the people while I photographed their activities and stuff. So it was like, I feel like it was a bit of a lazy thing in a way, because I didn't have to communicate at all. I just had to take the pictures. Whereas obviously when I'm working in the UK, there's a lot of talking and a lot of distraction. It's quite hard to concentrate sometimes because people like to talk to you, and you don't want them talking because you want them to get in their zone. So there's kind of pros and cons of working with translators. But I think when I came back to the UK, I thought, this is great. I can actually communicate properly, because you're never also sure whether they're telling exactly what you're saying. They might be doing their own version of it. So there's a lot of kind of negotiations on how you work together, and it's about finding the right one. And I think I've been really, really lucky over the years that I haven't had to try loads of different translators, or like I've found the one quite easily. I mean, I found them from different ways. I mean, the Savonsai, who I worked with in the Namu area in Pongsaly, there's only one travel company and one government-run agency, tourist agency in that area, so I didn't really have much choice, but it just turned out that he was really good.
We have another question here from the audience. Do you think there's enough investment in female photographers to make work? And can you reflect on how you maintain a work-life balance?
Well, I have to say that when I first started studying photography, there wasn't the balance of female and male photographers that there is now. It was much more male-dominated. And I have a sneaking suspicion I got into art college because there weren't as many women applying. But I then felt I had to prove myself, because obviously I did get a place to study photography. And I've never really felt disadvantaged. I've always felt that in some ways it is an advantage. I've definitely got freelance work because they wanted a woman, because they felt it was a sensitive subject, rightly or wrongly, that kind of thing. And I've just really got on with it, just did it my own way and not really worried about it too much. But when it comes to the work-life balance, I mean, obviously now I have a family, that's a big consideration. And I remember someone saying to me, another female photographer who was a mother when I was pregnant with my son, and I was panicking I was never going to work again, and she just said it's not a race. And I've always kept that in my mind, that slowly you build up work. When I worked in Vietnam, my son was 15 months old and he went to the nursery for like 4 hours, and I only had that 4 hours, and then I had to travel within that as well, and I just did it really, really slowly and built it up over time. That was the only way I can really do it. And even now he's 14, I've still got a lot of kind of running around responsibilities, and I just have to use my time really well. And I got rid of all my little freelance jobs that weren't really doing it for me, or they weren't earning me money, and I just said I'm going to do all the work that I want to do and all the work that earns me money. And that's how I've done it. So it kind of made me cut a load of stuff out that I couldn't really justify doing anymore, like too many favours or that kind of thing. So I don't know if that answers.
Do you find that quite often in the photographic world, that you're expected to work for nothing, for the pleasure of it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is. I mean, we all do some element of that, I think. But yeah, I mean, I have to say no more than I would have done before, because some people are definitely trying it on. So yeah.
Do we have Jenny in the audience? Can we pass the mic to Jenny? She has a question for us.
Hello, just wondered if you could tell us about any of the photographers or artists that have influenced you in your work?
I think at the beginning, the big influence for me was Chris Killip. It was the first book I ever bought, his book about the Isle of Man and, you know, the farmers and the portraits, and I've still got it. I remember buying it. It was £11. I always remember that, and it's very well used now. So he's still a big influence to me, you know, particularly his work in the Northeast. And I think quite recently, partly inspired by teaching the module at Sunderland, was Robert Darch, who's I don't know how old he is exactly, but I guess he's a younger photographer a bit. And his work about that looks like documentary photography, but it's more like a fictional narrative. And I'm quite interested in how to use images in a different way to tell a story that's not necessarily based on exact truth. And I have a project I'm working on now where I'm trying to think, how can I tell this story that I can't really tell? And so how am I going to do that? Is it going to be through words, or is it going to be through sequencing the images and things like that? So I think that's the very beginning and the very end. I mean, there's lots of photographers in between whose work I've looked at, obviously, but yeah.
Another question from the audience. Of these bodies of work in this exhibition, which one of you are you most proud of?
I guess that they all have their merits, but in the corner over there, there's some images from a project I did about a women's bomb disposal team in Laos. And I suppose, you know, it's about a lot of things. It's not just about the fact that they dispose of bombs. It's about the fact that, you know, it was a project that I set up to tell a story about how Laos was involved with the Vietnam War. And having lived in Vietnam for a year and not done anything about that, it was quite surprising that the first thing I wanted to do in Laos was about that. And I think it was about the untold story. And I decided it's kind of complicated to set up because I needed a work permit to work with the NGO. And then that obviously was very costly, and I had to have a government official with me and all these things. So I ended up doing a joint project between the Arts Council, the Financial Times magazine, and an NGO in Manchester called Minds Advisory Group. And so we went for a week. I hired someone to come with me to do audio, and we did a multimedia piece, and I went for a week, a very intensive kind of time, and did the story of them disposing of the UXO from the Vietnam War, and then going into their family lives and, you know, why they were in this position, what MAG did. You know, they kind of wanted women to well, there was women's only teams, there was men teams as well. And then the particular thing I'm proud about was that we did end up publishing it in the Financial Times, and it raised a lot of money for the NGO to continue their work, several, like thousands of pounds, and it wasn't meant to be an advertorial, it was just telling their story. And then I was able to, because I was living there, I was the only photographer that had ever taken photographs back to them, and we had a big event, showed them the film, gave them prints, we all had lots of beer and nice Lao food. And it was just a really lovely thing to do, that if you catapult yourself into a situation where, if I'd been in England, I would have gone for a week and come home. But because I was living there, I felt that that was like really lovely thing to be able to do, you know, to be able to go back and do that. The British Embassy funded an exhibition in Vientiane as well. So there's quite a lot of stuff for the local community to give back, really. And I suppose if you meet these kind of people that are doing this amazing job, you know, they're clearing up someone else's mess in their country, basically. You know, you realise how amazing they are. You know, they're just normal women, they're mothers, you know, they have never had a job before because there are no jobs, they're all farmers. You know, they're really, really inspirational. And I was really, you know, being able to tell their story, I'll never forget the experience of being out on the fields with them, you know, like life and death I mean, this particular NGO has had no accidents, but there are often like accidents with the clearance teams, because I think there's 17 different clearance teams in Laos. So, you know, they're putting their lives at risk and happy to do so. So I think that's, as I say, I don't think I'll ever forget that experience of being there with them.
You just mentioned there about publishing in the Financial Times. Could you tell us something about how other bodies of work have been published and have reached different audiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started my career, I imagined I wanted to be an editorial photographer. And I think, you know, in the late 80s and 90s, it was much more of a male-dominated thing. And I tried my best to, you know, but I was living in Yorkshire and everything was based in London. You know, so I kind of didn't take me long to realise that I was going to be able to do the work I wanted to do through funding from the arts. You know, like I would be able to work on things for longer. So most of these pieces in here in the exhibition were created for a gallery space, but that doesn't mean to say I haven't published them. I've published them in art kind of or photography magazines and also in like Sunday supplement type magazines, but you know, I'm trying to think where specific pieces. I mean, the Farmer Florist was published in Rake's Progress, which is a kind of niche gardening, urban gardening magazine. And then two bodies of work are books as well. Yeah. So, Hand to Mouth and Homework published as books. I mean, you know, lots of the flower farming stuff's been published in different newspapers to accompany other people's stories. But I mean, over the years, things do appear in different places. Yeah, I'm trying to think where Hand to Mouth has been published, but yeah, the gallery did a book on that. So. And do you enjoy collaborating with curators and galleries and publishers and designers? Yeah, I think more as time's gone on, I've found it being quite a lonely occupation being a photographer. I've kind of feel like I've probably got a bit more sociable as I've got older. And I really like working on my own to do the work, because I feel like sometimes if you've got other people with you, you know, it's kind of distracting. You know, I don't ever use an assistant or anything like that unless I'm told to by a client, which has happened before. And then when I got the work, I really love collaborating, you know, like it's about the editing, the sequencing, you know, what is the story, having someone to talk to about it, you know, because sometimes other people's perspectives, they can ask you the question that you need. I need to be told what I already know, I've discovered. I'm that kind of person. Like, even though I know that picture's not good enough, really, I need to be someone to tell me. Or, you know, it's not clear what the story is, or you need, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I really like that part of it now, especially. Good. I'd just like to remind everyone that we are live streaming, so if we have messages or questions, observations coming in with Facebook or with Twitter, it'd be great to hear them.
We have a question on Twitter from Ralph David, who says that he visited Vietnam last year, thinks it's a beautiful place, and wonders whether or not you have a portfolio of your time spent there. On my website, I have a page about the particular homework project. I'm very much a project-based person. I don't really take that many general pictures, so so on my website, that's the only place that I would have that particular series. Any other questions? No, but I'd just like to say to our online viewers, if you do have any questions, you can tweet us at Side Gallery, or you can put your comments in on the Facebook page as well. You mentioned previously that you studied photography, and when you were starting in those early years, how did you find it? How did you make progress and mistakes? As a student, or after graduating? I think I took quite a long time to get going, to be fair. I think I went straight from school to art college. I didn't have that experience of working, and I think if I did it again, I think it was really valuable to have worked and got some kind of life experience. I'd never left home before, and I just turned up, and I didn't really know what to photograph, and I think it took me quite a long time to do that. And when I left, the first project I did was about the automation of lighthouses, and I travelled around the UK for 3 years
in a bright orange 2CV, which broke down all the time. But it was good, and I photographed all the remaining man's lighthouses. And Trinity House, before it was, pre-internet, I just woke up one morning and thought, oh, lighthouses. Phoned them up and they said, oh yeah, that's fine, you can do that, we'll fly you out to Bishop Rock, we'll do this, that, the other. And I had to do that because obviously, even though the student loans weren't what they are now, I still had an overdraft when I left to pay off. So I had, different jobs. I had full-time photography-related jobs, like as a technician, or I worked for the York Archaeological Trust as a staff photographer. And then on my weekends and holidays, I continued this lighthouse project, which I then funded myself. I got some money from I think it was called Yorkshire Arts then, like £300 was the maximum you could get then. And then funded it myself and toured it myself, literally made the frames, printed them in my bathroom, took them round to all the galleries and museums to do that. And then I think it was quite a long time, I'm trying to think, a few years later that I started to work with Yorkshire food producers, which led on to work with the hill farmers, which then led on to some of the work that we've got here in the gallery today. So it's kind of like a linear process, but I suppose in the end of the day I just wanted to do it, and I just kept on doing it. Once I got into my rhythm of what I wanted to photograph, I was fine. I think I didn't know what I wanted to photograph for a long time.
Yeah. We have another question from the audience here. As an emerging photographer, we often hear about portfolio careers, which you're talking about how we all evolve differently and fund our work in different ways. The idea that you might have different photographic careers and be freelance, and there are peaks and troughs. Can you talk about when things are good and when things are bad?
Yeah, so I call it the freelance roller coaster, and this last couple of years I've been at the top of the roller coaster and just stayed there. But I know that eventually it will come down again. The commissions probably won't keep on coming like they have been the last couple of years. And, and I suppose, prior to when I came back from Laos was quite a big down time because I'd lost all my freelance contract contacts, so all my editorial work. Like I told people I was back and there was a little flurry of like, here, yeah, well, you're back, we'll give you some work. And then there was kind of nothing. So I decided to dream up my own project to keep me going, which is why I did Farmer Florist. It was something I could do quite easily, from my home base without spending too much money, and then try and build up the freelance work again. But over the years, it's changed a lot. I used to do a lot of work for government agencies like National Rivers Authority and people like that. And then I've done a lot of like workshops within the community. I worked on a touring van that went round the Yorkshire Dales and the moors and stuff. And just, I suppose that's one of the things that happened that really made me think you've got to have more than one string to your bow was foot and mouth disease when I was working in Nidderdale, and they told me just like that to stop working. And I was lucky because I'd taken on a big commission to photograph some textiles for a book, and I was really glad because it was so tempting to just concentrate on one thing, and that kind of taught me a lesson, not only financially, but like, you've got to keep these different things going. And then of course, there's elements of teaching and visiting lectures. I do a lot of that, and just, at the moment I'm working on personal projects, commissions, teaching, visiting lectures, workshops, exhibitions, yeah. So yeah, and lots, I suppose, we're all a bit fidgety and we like to do lots of different things. I'm not the 9 to 5 kind of person anyway, so,
So the peaks and troughs thing, how would you motivate yourself when things weren't so good, weren't so rosy?
Just go out with my camera, I guess.
Yeah.
Just go up onto the hills and, just get out and do something, like I'm not very good at sitting in front of the computer anyway, but I suppose I'm never short of ideas and inspiration for things to do if I haven't got any paid work. And I think the biggest thing is being on your own all the time. If you're not with other people working, then it's trying to keep your spirits up and really keep in touch with other photographers. There's a photographer near me that we meet up quite a lot just because we're working on our own a lot and things like that. So, go to exhibitions, go to talks, all that helps to kind of keep you in the mood of it all, really.
Yeah. Do you find that social media interaction supports your practice as well and keeps you connected beyond face-to-face?
Yeah, I think it does. When I was in Vietnam particularly, there was no kind of network of photographers like me. There were commercial photographers and NGO photographers and people like that, but there were no people doing kind of arts-based projects really. And so like I kept a blog, and then I did Facebook and stuff, and like kept in touch with what was going on in the industry, you know, in the UK via social media and things. I mean, I'm not a particular great fan of it, and I don't know if I've ever got any work from it or anything like that, but I definitely think it's good for keeping people in the loop of what you do. And I don't know, you know, I mean, do you actively follow certain photographers to see what they're doing, you know, galleries in general?
I usually follow other venues and publishers as well to look at what they're publishing, because what gets shown at Side Gallery needs to be of a certain scale. And that's how we start to look at what we're going to show here, is that there has to be enough work to start with, and the quality and the excellence has to be there, of course. And then the other initial parameter is, can we afford it? Does it exist as an exhibition? Can we produce the exhibition, such as this one, your work on this wall? This was printed in-house and all the framing was done in-house. And so that's why it's very bespoke for this space. So every exhibition's slightly different in how it comes about and what the potential is with the exhibition. So the one after this will be different again on the climate crisis, and then the one after that will be, the one on youth will be different because that's an archive show. And then we'll be introducing some younger photographers, and then the one after that will be the climate crisis. So it's kind of horses for courses, and then we're very much watching what's happening in contemporary life, and then wanting to reflect that and also produce things that are relevant to the audience we have and potential other audiences.
Yeah, I think the big thing about social media for me is that feeling that, you know, we're all working. I remember working on my Lighthouse project for 3 years and not knowing someone else was working on a Lighthouse project, you know, and they published theirs before me. But I mean, they're all, you know, you're doing your things. I came to that for my reasons, he went to that for his reasons, you know, like, you know, and I think now I feel very mindful that I would like everyone to know I'm working in Morecambe Bay, for example. I don't want to share all the work because then there's nothing for anyone to see at the end, but I want everyone to know that I'm doing that. They can go and do it as well, of course, but I feel that that's what I like to use it for, you know, just to show that I'm active, that I'm working, you know, and that kind of thing. But I'm not like a slave to it by any stretch of the imagination.
Do we have an online question?
Yes, we've got a question from Sam Johnson, who says, did Tessa come across any reluctance when photographing communities, and if so, how did she deal with it?
I have to say that I don't generally get any reluctance. You might get the odd person who just said they'd rather not be photographed, but all the projects in this room, basically, either it's my personality, or it's the translator's done a good job, or something, you know. There's actually, even in this day and age, it's really, really surprising how people just want to talk to you, you know, and they want to tell you their stories, and they're happy for you to photograph them. I often think, would I be happy for someone to photograph me in the way I photograph other people? And I don't know that I necessarily
or your children photograph your son.
Yeah, my son doesn't like being photographed. No. You know, he might do if there was a strange photographer came in the house, he might feel that was different. But I think generally, absolutely no problem at all.
Whereas I've had a knife pulled on me, I've been attacked.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So maybe it's just we have a different personality, and people take a...
Well, maybe you're working in more kind of dangerous areas. You know.
Possibly.
I don't know. I mean, I never ever basically work in cities. I don't know whether that would make a difference to people. I mean, I have done freelance jobs before where I had to photograph something by a river, and someone came out and said, "Why are you pointing your camera at my window?" And it wasn't specifically their window, but you know, I've had things like that before on freelance jobs, and I've had horrible freelance jobs where the person hasn't wanted to be photographed and has been really, really horrible, and then I've had to use every bit of charm that I have, and my stories about puffin hunters to get me out of the situation, you know, photographing Clarissa Dixon Wright, who's one of the fat ladies. She was not having it. So I came up with my puffin hunting story, and I pulled her around and got the shot for the Telegraph. You know, sometimes, you know, they're supposed to have cleared the person, you know, they're supposed to know what you're going to see them for, and they haven't done it properly. But my personal projects, I've never have a problem, because I take time. And also, if people say no, I accept it as well. Yeah.
Good. Any other questions from the audience? Do you have one, Carol?
Oh no.
Actually, this is a question for both of you, really. It was you've hinted at it, but I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how this exhibition came about and what the value is, both to you, Dean, as a photographer and a curator, and to you, Tessa. What's been the value of working on this project?
For me, well, it's not a well-kept secret that I've wanted to have an exhibition at the Side Gallery, being the, you know, UK's really only documentary photography gallery for a long time. So when Dean phoned me and asked me to do it, I was obviously really delighted to do that, and I think we've had a good time working on this. You know, we worked together on choosing which bodies of work, you know, we would show, you know, to show this progression of my work over the years, you know, and obviously fit in with Rena's work as well downstairs. And obviously, you know, I'm really delighted that we've been partnered up as a pair of, you know, photographers working in similar areas but in different ways. But I have to say that the curation, I was quite happy to provide, you know, wide edit of work, and Dean really chose the images and how they went together. I kind of like that. I like to see how someone else takes my work and does something with it. I would never have probably done this in this way. I absolutely loved the idea of it being like a river going along the wall, and it, you know, I had absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever. So you can take the credit for that. Yeah, so I mean, you know, the other pieces of work came from existing exhibitions where I worked with different curators in different galleries. Impressions Gallery, I worked with Greg Hobson on Farmer Florist, and I worked with the Mercer Gallery for Homework, and so those bodies of work already existed as framed exhibitions, and then we just had to select a small part out of that, and again, Dean took the lead on that. So I don't know if you want to say anything.
Well, the first thing we did was we decided which bodies of work we weren't going to involve in this exhibition. So Rena's downstairs has 3 different essays within that exhibition, and then we decided that yours would have 4. And that one main focus would be this body of work because it hadn't been shown before. So, like I was saying earlier, part of the thinking was to show work that's far away, but work that's also made just down the road, really, or locally, and how that different approach is quite often very similar, and the images are similar, but the context can be very, very different. And the other thing that I tried to do between the upstairs and downstairs exhibitions was to show them visually differently. So Rena had a very specific idea about how she wanted her work shown. And then I was thinking, well, I want to do it differently up here, but I don't want to put 1 or 2 pictures to represent a whole body of work that took, you know, years of effort to finish. And so the idea of butting them up together came about, and it was a way of trying to get more work in the gallery but not making it look overbearing. And so that was quite the thinking. So for example, this wall here, if this were all just a simple lateral show, then it wouldn't fit in the gallery. But there's a lot of pictures there, but it doesn't feel crowded. So there's always that challenge of trying to interpret the actual object of the exhibition in a certain way, and that's very much part of this thinking. Whereas previously with Ivor Prickett's End of the Caliphate, that was all very, very simply exhibited because the story was the important thing, not how it was presented. It was to get to what was happening in Syria and what's still happening there. Yeah. Do we have any other questions or from the audience?
We do have a question
from online.
From Michael Davidson for Tessa. Do you envisage harnessing video as part of your process as a freelance photographer? And do you feel that you can stay purely as a stills photographer in the future?
I would absolutely love to say that I would like to embrace video. I just feel like I've been a photographer for so long. It's going to take me so long to be as good at video as I am at photography. I do like some little snapshots with the video, like when I had the commission from NEPN to photograph more flower farmers, I did some small bits of video. And, but I when I've done the multimedia in Laos, I worked with somebody else, so it's more like a collaboration where I did the photography. I just feel that video is a very different thing. And although cameras now, you can do both on the same one, I'm not sure that I will ever get into doing a film or proper video. I just don't think in that way. I just think it's completely different. And I think it's a really good thing for young photographers and young people these days. They don't have that. It's all the same, well, it might not be all the same, but, I think they've grown up with it, and I think that it might be easier, and I think it's very advisable. If I was younger, I would definitely be looking at doing videos and more multimedia pieces than I have been. But what was the second half of the question?
Do you feel that you can stay purely as a still photographer in the future?
I'm going to try. Yeah, so I still feel like I'm getting plenty of opportunities and plenty of work doing the work that I do, and I think hopefully that will continue.
For our audience, I'd just like to say Side Gallery has been on the quayside in Newcastle since 1977, and as part of the exhibitions we've had here with Sebastião Salgado, Susan Masalis, Robert Duano, part of the operation is we have an archive as well, and some of the work we commission goes into the archive, so it's well worth our audience to go to amberside.org to have a look at what we've actually produced in the past and who the photographers are we've worked with and what the stories are behind that work. When it comes down to the exhibitions we have here right now, Renée Effendi will be coming to the northeast of England tomorrow to talk about her work in the gallery downstairs. So that will be from 2:00, and that's completely free to anyone who wants to come and take part in that. As I said earlier, the rest of this year we have a youth exhibition from the archive and from younger work by younger photographers. After that will be the climate crisis, so something that's very pertinent to the political discourse at the moment. And then at the end, a Northeast photographer, Tom Stoddart, will be showing a retrospective, a themed retrospective, which I can't divulge at the moment, but it will also coincide with the publishing of a book around that work. What I've got to say next is thanks to the Arts Council of England for supporting Side Gallery, to the Community Foundation in Newcastle, to the partners who have been involved in the cross-posting, which are NEPN in Sunderland, Stills Gallery in Edinburgh, Martin Parr Foundation in Bristol, and Belfast Exposed in Belfast. The production team here are Meerkat Productions. They've done a great job and made us all very comfortable, and it's been a great experience. For the people who are online enjoying the live stream, if you could feedback if you've enjoyed it or not found it very enjoyable, then we'd love to hear from you, and thanks for taking part, everybody.